I am really thrilled with this evening and the superstars that we have with us. Ages ago, when we thought that this was going to be in Yakima and co-hosted by Kittitas League, I asked one of our issue chairs to contact Celina because frankly, she didn't know me from Adam. And I was afraid that I couldn't get through. Well, that turned into a very nice email exchange, easy between she and me, in which she agreed that she would come to Yakima and do this wonderful presentation. And I had seen something similar at National, and I just sat there rhapsodized thinking, oh, if only everybody in Washington could hear this. And she said yes. And I did what I typically do when someone says yes to me. I said, and would National pay for it? And she said yes again. And so we have these two wonderful things happen to us. We have her, and we have her at no expense. And then she said, how about I get Jessica Jones Capparell to share the spotlight with me? And I thought, oh my gosh, we have a twofer. And this is so fabulous because we really, really do get the best of the best. I think that there's something wonderful about being around people who are whip smart and just very, very strategic. And they don't make you feel bad that you're not necessarily so whip smart and very, very strategic. And I really like that and appreciate that about both of them. You have read Celina and Jessica's bios in the material, and I just want to bring home a point for you about how lucky we are. Celina's been with the league for about 2 years. And oh my gosh, she has not let any grass grow under her feet. This is a woman who is on fire and moving fast. In that time, she has accomplished many of the things that she will tell you about. Her partner in virtue is Jessica Jones Capparell, who is the mastermind behind the federal advocacy priorities. She focuses on the National Volunteer Lobby Corps, policy positions, and grassroots strategies. And when you see something wonderful coming out of League of Women Voters National, she has a shy smile and says, thank you. And I bet I know where a lot of that stuff comes from. There are some natural tensions between local and national organizations, between staff and volunteers. We need each other, and it is either easy or it is not. These two women are impressively sensitive to those tensions. We all know that what works for some will not work for others, and we know that being heard and able to work through what is best for all is essential. These women are able to do that. The league is somewhat unique in that membership involves a certain amount of sweat equity. We work hard, and you will be thrilled as I am to know that your work is being supported and led by these women. They're going to cover an overview of litigation and advocacy work, how priorities are determined, and how they react to pressing issues. There'll be time for questions and answers. I'll be watching the chat box and trying to make sure that all of your questions get answered. And I would like Celina and Jessica to take us away. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I don't even know what to say about that introduction. I'm like, who's she talking about? But I think I speak on behalf of Jessica and myself when I say thank you so much for that introduction. We work with some of the smartest women and men across the country who are known as leaguers. And so I think that we are in good company because I learned so much from each of you. And I hope that I'm able to bestow some wisdom on you as well in the process. So let's get to it. So we're talking about when the league goes to court and all the things that happen before we get there, which is Jessica's presentation. So I'm happy to just start us off. Okay, so that's me and Jessica, our obligatory slide with our photos there. That's my title, another obligatory slide, which I'll just skip over, which is at the end too, so you all can reach out if you need to. But I really want to talk about the litigation portfolio. And sometimes it's easier to talk about it as topics. So we have 5 categories of topics going on nationwide right now. We have redistricting, of course, which, you know, understanding that redistricting is going to happen in 2021, it's very relevant. We also have the National Voter Registration Act. And for those who are not aware, the league was really instrumental in passing this law. We drafted parts of this law. We were invited when it became law and given a pen, which hangs in our office, from President Bill Clinton for just being so active in drafting this piece of legislation. And then we also have voter purges. So those are the cases where there are purges, and sometimes the purges are 35,000, but like we saw in some parts of the country last year, it was 300,000 in some cases. So voter purges are very important and something that we have to push back on. And then COVID-19. I think before the beginning of the year, we were all living normally, and then the pandemic happened and it completely flipped our world upside down. So as a result, many cases stem from COVID-19 and the impact that is having on elections and how we are able to, as a league, use our brand in order to push back to expand voter access for people across the country. And then we have a catch-all, because we all need a catch-all, right? Which has many different topics. And so we'll go over those a little bit. I have a slide just to kind of give you an idea of what constitutes other in this space. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the redistricting cases. We have the Gill versus Whitford, which was a partisan gerrymandering case out of Wisconsin. And that really set the tone. It really was the impetus for our Ruscio v. League of Women Voters of North Carolina case. And because of that devastating loss before the Supreme Court, where, you know, they just got it wrong. They got it wrong that day. But it did cause us to launch a national redistricting campaign. So this is really the impetus for the People Powered Fair Maps campaign, this case here. And then we have LWV Michigan case. This was the case moving forward with the Independent Redistricting Commission. So the league worked so hard in partnership with so many other organizations to get an Independent Redistricting Commission in place. And then once the voters approved it, the legislature went back to their respective places and tried to dismantle everything that happened. So the league has been working to keep that Independent Redistricting Commission in place. And then we have cases in Mississippi. This was one of the very few racial gerrymandering cases, which is still protected under Section 5, thank goodness. So we're hoping for a positive ruling in that case. And then we have two coalition cases, both in Nevada and also Oklahoma, where the league is either a co-chair of the coalition leading the redistricting effort in that state. And because things weren't going as planned, like in getting signatures or whatever needs to be done in that particular state, we've had to sue to make sure that the redistricting plan is protected for 2021. So those are those cases. So these are the 5 cases that we currently have on deck to protect redistricting for 2021. And then the next set of cases are, of course, the National Voter Registration Act, or NVRA. So we have cases in Texas, 2 cases in Texas, actually. So Texas is very busy at doing the bad things. And then we have California, Arizona, and Missouri. And these cases are really to make sure that the spirit and the technical pieces of the National Voter Registration Act are protected. The National Voter Registration Act is all about that time frame that voters have before an election to register to vote. It has to be, they have to be given 30 days before an election happens to vote. So when states try to narrow that time frame, like only give people 45 days before an election to vote, that violates the NVRA because they still have an additional 15 days to register to vote. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, so I just want to let you know the cases that we have going on across the country in this space. Next slide, please. And then we have voter purges. So we have Pennsylvania also been busy, North Carolina. We have some usual suspects here. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana has 2 cases where there have just been massive voter purges. And you know, I think it's important for all leagues in all states to maintain clean rolls. We've never disputed that, right? I think it's important to have rolls that are clean, but we want to make sure that we are cleaning rolls and doing that in an effective way, but also a reasonable and lawful way. So in these cases, it was not lawful. They were using bad data. Like in one of the cases in Michigan, they said, hey, all of these people are dead. And then we found people on the list who actually weren't dead and had just voted in 2016. So it's like, oh, that's a problem, right? The person voted as recently as 2016 and 2018, and we're accusing them of being dead without doing any actual checking. And there were no death certificates for these people either. So we have several cases, the Pennsylvania cases like that, also the Michigan cases and the North Carolina, where they're just using data that's not verified in order to purge thousands and thousands of voters. So we're pushing back in all of these areas to make sure that we protect as many voters as possible for 2020 election. Next slide, please. I hope you guys know what this little ball of orange stuff is. This is COVID. This is what COVID looks like. But for the league, COVID has completely blown up our portfolio. We currently have 20 states across the country engaged in COVID-related litigation. So it is a very, very busy time. COVID has, like I said, kind of knocked everything off of its feet. So we have a few cases. I know this is a lot of text, so I have this beautiful slide that my legal fellow created for anyone who's a visual learner in just a moment. But we have a few cases. So Kentucky is doing, this is COVID litigation, but it's around a voter ID law. It is the first and only case in the country dealing with voter ID and COVID. So this is a novel case for the League of Women Voters. We also have a case in North Dakota. We just won that case today. The court granted a preliminary injunction and made sure that every single voter in the state could have access to absentee ballots and that their ballots could be turned in by election day and still be counted, which is really important because their election is on June 9th, just this upcoming Tuesday. So that lawsuit will protect about 250,000 people, which is significant. We also have cases in North Carolina, Louisiana, and Minnesota. All of these cases, or the Louisiana case at least, is dealing with a really bad law that came out from the legislature to make it harder for people to vote. They would need not one witness signature, but two, which is unheard of across the country. So you sign your ballot and then you have to find two people to validate and say that you are who you are. So it's just an incredible burden for people who may have compromised immune systems, older people, etc. Next slide, please. And then we also have cases in New Jersey, North Dakota again, and Coalition. This is a redistricting case, but also COVID related. We also have the Nevada case, which I mentioned. Virginia, we just won that case a few weeks ago that we got a consent decree to make sure that people did not need to get a witness for their ballots. And this impacted about 237,000 people in the state for June 23rd. So significant, like I said, significant wins here that is being impacted. Also in Wisconsin, you all saw what happened in Wisconsin, Milwaukee. I think it was on the news everywhere. It was a national story. We did not win that full case, but what the court did give us is the ability for people to turn in their ballots at one of those ballot boxes, which I think is new for this election cycle, but you drop it in a ballot box and it could be counted if it was done that day. We found that the people, and that wasn't a remedy before, you had to have the ballot received by election day instead of being postmarked on the day and counted. So this impacted nearly 300,000 people. So even though 67,000 people never received ballots, so they had to make the choice whether to go and vote in person. But for the folks who were able to get to a ballot box on that day, over 300,000 people. So that was a huge win for Wisconsinites in that area. Next slide, please. And then Arizona and Arkansas and Coalition. So these are, the Arkansas group is working on signature collection. They're trying to collect signatures for their ballot initiative around redistricting. And of course, the good folks in Arkansas are not making it easy for them to collect signatures during COVID. So what we are calling for there is for them to be able to collect those signatures digitally or online in order to keep the momentum and make sure that they have an opportunity to move that in time for 2020. Ohio, I think everybody knows, or some people may know what happened in Ohio, where the governor canceled the election, and then the legislature said, no, we're gonna keep it going. So people literally didn't know on election day whether or not they could go vote. And so when people went out to vote, they noticed that there were signs on the door saying polling locations closed, go home. And so, oh, someone is saying that the slides aren't changing for them. Can everyone else see the slides moving? Yes? Okay, I see people nodding. I'm not sure. We'll try to help resolve that. Yeah. Oh, not for a few people are having issues seeing the slides.
What slide are we supposed to be looking at right now?
They're all the same header. They just have different content on them. So I'm not sure if that's maybe the confusion. But what you should see on the screen is Arizona for fair elections, League of Women Voters, Arkansas and Coalition, Ohio, etc. It's the same graphic.
Perfect. That is what I'm seeing.
Okay, good. Well, that's a very good note. I need to change these slides so people don't think they're looking at the same thing every time. So I'll make sure I make that adjustment. But yeah, so Ohio voters showed up and the polls were actually closed. They closed them for a state of health emergency. And so they had to move their election by 2 weeks, and it caused increased or really a depressed turnout. So we are now in court fighting to find a remedy for November in that case. Next slide, please. And then I just want to talk about Oklahoma, Missouri, New Mexico. All of these cases are cases where we're trying to lift the signature requirement so that voters can just sign their ballot on the outside, stick it in an envelope, drop it in the mail, and it be counted. So I just wanted to mention that. And the other two cases, I mean, the Ohio case is related to the same issue that I mentioned before. So for those of you who like visuals, yay, a different slide, I thought that this might be helpful to just outline the cases, the COVID cases by issue in a pie chart. And like I said, my legal fellow pulled this together and I just love it. So 48% of our litigation right now in the COVID space is absentee voting. That's significant. It's nearly half of the portfolio in this topic area. We have 16% of our cases dealing with in-person voting. Many of the cases many of the states wanted to expand absentee voting universally, which means that there would be no other option. And because you have visually impaired people, so disabled people, African Americans, and other communities who just don't have good access to mail or reliable mail systems, they need in-person options. And so it was very, very important to make sure that in-person opportunities were still available to maintain certain very important civil rights concerns. Like I mentioned, we also have voter ID case, online signature collection, which is dealing with any ballot collection or ballot initiative that's going on. Also the voter registration cases, expanded vote by mail, and postponing election. That was the Ohio and Wisconsin cases. And then you'll see on the side a few additional categories as well, like witness signature, no excuse absentee, notice and cure, and notary signatures, as well as moving the absentee deadline. So I know that that is very technical information that I just shared with you all right now, and it can get a little into the weeds, but I'm happy to have this opportunity to share with you all the cases that we have going on across the country, because it really shows the strength of the league and just how much work leagues across the country are doing to push back on bad laws and make sure that we find a way to enfranchise as many voters as possible in an effort to fulfill our mission to empower voters and defend democracy. So I could not be more proud of the work that's going on right now. And, you know, we're winning. Right now, our rate is at like 82%, which is pretty freaking good for us. But we have an 82% win rate on the cases that have been decided so far. We're hoping to maintain that and increase it to just show our collective strength as the League of Women Voters, and that when we go to court, you know, we're going for a good reason and we're bringing solid cases. So I think that that is the end of my presentation, and I would love to, the single cases. Let me just let folks know that we have a few other cases. So it's these cases, some of these are before the Supreme Court, so we should have a decision this month. The Supreme Court rules mostly in June on the Thursdays. They have so many cases on the docket, they may add an additional day towards the end of the month, but we'll see. But we are in court for sex discrimination, also DACA, to make sure that DACA recipients maintain a level of protection as laws change and are in flux right now. And then we also have still redistricting cases. We also had a returning citizen case. That's the case out of Texas. Ms. Mason Hobbs was convicted of a crime, was let out on probation, and thought that she could vote. When asking her local election officials and also her state representative, they told her that she could vote because she was out of prison. But when she went to cast her ballot, she was informed that because she was on parole, that she was actually in violation of the law, and they sued her. They charged her for illegal voting. So it was just a really awful case where she had done the right thing, but trying to get answers and trying to get control and wanting understanding of the law and was still persecuted. So we thought it was important to join that case in solidarity with the confusion around that law. So I think those are the primary issues under the single case issues. And now I think I'm actually done, right, Jessica? I think that's actually really my last slide.
I think you have one more.
Oh my God, it's like I didn't, okay. So I just want to let folks know that there are two processes we have two processes at the national office. So when there are federal court cases, there has to be some coordination between our office and the state league. And the reason why that's important is because in the federal space, we have so many cases going on right now. I think a total outside of the COVID litigation, there's a total of 34 cases. And many of these cases are in the same circuit. So when you're at the federal level, it means one court is overseeing multiple states litigation. And so we try to coordinate and make sure that we are looped in so that we're not disturbing your colleagues' cases. So if there's a case in North Carolina and Virginia, those are all part of the same circuit. So we want to make sure whatever cases we're bringing to that circuit are consistent enough and don't jeopardize or sabotage the work of another state. So we partner in that way, and we do that through the federal action form, and it gives us an opportunity to review the case, talk with the attorneys, review retainer agreements to make sure that we're putting the leagues in the best position to speak about the case, raise visibility, and maintain your power as a league. And so we make sure that coordination comes through that form. And then there's also state court cases, and we just ask that states loop us in so that we're aware. And to the extent that I can, I try to offer support there as well. So if you need me to look at a retainer agreement, or you need me to look at the complaint and make sure everything is all good, I'm happy to do that in those situations too. So I just wanted to kind of go over that since I have a captive audience here to listen and all of those things. I want to let you know the difference between federal court cases and state court cases and how we move those along at the national office. Okay, good Lord. Thanks, Jessica. I think you're up. So Jessica is our senior manager of policy and legislative affairs. She is the guru of federal advocacy. And she also assists and supports states in building out their state strategy. So if you have questions about how to conduct a meeting, how to get to yes with the legislator, Jessica is your person to help you get there. So I just want to turn over to Jessica to share a little bit about the work that she's doing.
Thanks, Celina. I'm very excited to be here with you all tonight. I know there's a lot going on in the world, but I'm glad we can all have this time together. And thank you for those kind words, Celina. You know, Lunella is correct. Since Celina has come to the league, our department has just grown by leaps and bounds, and the reputation of the league has blossomed, and we are really, really lucky to have her, and I am really very happy to continue to work for her every single day. I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy and lobbying and our work at the federal level. And before I get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that all the work that we do is grounded in our positions and in our principles. And today I have our lovely Impact on Issues book, and Celina always laughs at me because wherever I go, I always take my trusty copy of Impact on Issues. Impact on Issues is, of course, designed to help league members use all of the LWVUS public policy positions effectively at the national, state, local, and even the regional level. The intention is to inspire leagues to use our national positions to act in your own communities with your own neighbors and your own elected officials. There are many changes that have happened to Impact on Issues. We're getting ready to put out a new edition after convention. But it is an indispensable resource for league members, and it provides a clear understanding of our positions, how they interrelate, and how they can complement and reinforce, again, that state, local, and regional interleague organization positions. And it helps strengthen the league's impact at all levels of government. If you ever have questions about how to apply our positions at any level, you're always welcome to contact me. If I don't have the answer, then I will get you an answer. It might take a couple minutes for me to think about it. But all of our work is grounded within our positions and, of course, our principles, which are also contained in Impact on Issues. So advocacy and policy. We tend to focus our efforts in the league on influencing legislative measures in the U.S. Congress and at the state and local legislative bodies by preparing testimony, by lobbying legislators, and initiating advocacy campaigns of interest to our members. We also work to monitor and comment when regulations are being written for executive branch agencies. And as you just heard from Celina, we also file lawsuits and amicus briefs in court cases and monitor court happenings in litigation all around the country. And I hope you can all tell that Celina has been very, very busy with all of the cases going on around the country. As a league, we work together to influence public policy. And part of what that means is what we call speaking with one voice. Speaking with one voice is one of the most important tenets of the league. The National League, of course, is responsible for determining strategies and action policies that ensure the league's message on national issues is consistent throughout the country. And similarly, state leagues are responsible for a consistent state message, and then on down to local leagues at the local level as well. And it's important for all of us to cooperate with one another to ensure that all of the issues we're talking about, we're using one voice and doing it in a manner consistent with our neighbor leagues or on up and down the national, state, local level. As part of our advocacy and lobbying, the national office sets legislative priorities every single year. Legislative priorities are done to guide our work in Congress. We work directly with the LWVUS board every January to adopt lobbying priorities every year. The goal, of course, is to maintain focus on issues of primary importance identified by LWVUS. As a body, LWVUS goals are to project a focused and consistent message, enhance the league's effectiveness and impact, build the league's credibility and visibility, ensure that we have a sufficient issue and political expertise to comment on a legislative issue, reflect program decisions which are made at convention, which is coming up, and build on strong member interest and support, while also enabling the league to manage our resources effectively. Our 2020 legislative priorities include the campaign for making democracy work, and that includes a special emphasis on protecting voting rights, redistricting, as well as enhanced focus in money and politics on promoting public financing, i.e. small donors. For the past several years, we have also included a watchdog list of issues where we respond strategically on issues with LWV positions as needed. This year, those issues include climate change, Equal Rights Amendment, gun safety, healthcare, and immigration. And these things change every year. We look at what Congress is supposed to have on the docket, and we also look at where we have member interest and member input. I would be remiss if I did not mention a very dedicated group of 15 to 20 volunteers from the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area called the LWVUS Lobby Corps. The Lobby Corps comes into our office once a month, or meets virtually now, for a briefing on a specific piece of legislation or a specific issue that we know is in front of Congress. And we meet for a briefing to talk through the ins and outs of the issue, meet for about 2 hours. And then they are tasked with going to Capitol Hill and lobbying on behalf of our office and lobbying on behalf of our state and local leagues around the country. One of the things that we will be working with Lobby Corps to continue to do is to make stronger connections to our state and local leagues and also to help us grow our relationships with our members of Congress all around the country. They are a very dedicated group of volunteers, and if you come to the virtual convention, you'll get an opportunity to hear more about them. Now I'm going to talk about some specific pieces of legislation that we're supporting this year and we have supported in the biennium. First and foremost is the For the People Act. The For the People Act, or HR1, is a comprehensive democracy reform bill that actually passed in the U.S. House. It did not pass with a bipartisan majority, but it did pass successfully out of the House. It covers and encompasses issues around voting rights, including same-day registration, automatic registration, restoring the Voting Rights Act, addressing voter purges, and it also covers money and politics issues like public financing, disclosure, stopping coordination between super PACs and candidate campaigns. And then it also includes some ethics pieces. There's some pieces around transparency and government accountability. The Supreme Court doesn't have a rule of an ethics board or an ethics system, so that it would input that into the bill. Like I said, it did pass the House. We were there, Celina and I, and then several of our colleagues were there in the gallery when it passed. We were also there when it was both introduced in the House and there when it was introduced in the Senate. It is basically every single policy priority around voting rights, money and politics, and it also includes redistricting that we have been asking Congress to implement for decades. So it has been a major focus. It's come off the table a little bit now because it's stuck in the Senate, and there hasn't been a hearing on it in the Senate. But we're hopeful that perhaps we will have a more reform-minded Congress in the future, and have a president who would support this legislation and see it move forward. Other voting rights legislation that we're supporting, HR 4 or S561. This is the Voting Rights Advancement Act. This is my top priority in my lobbying life. This bill would, I knew Celina was going to laugh at that. This would restore the Voting Rights Act. After the Shelby County decision, the Supreme Court Shelby County decision in 2013 gutted the Voting Rights Act and got rid of the pre-clearance process, we've seen rampant discrimination at the polls. And HR 4 or S561 is the legislation to fix that, to reestablish the pre-clearance process, and also provide nationwide notification to voters for any and all changes that happen around voting within a timely manner. The Voting Rights Act, the loss of the Voting Rights Act also has a huge impact on redistricting, which of course we all know the redistricting cycle is coming up very soon. So we are anxious to see it restored, if not in time for the redistricting cycle, then very soon thereafter. This legislation has also passed in the House, but it also, but like the For the People Act, it has not received a hearing in the Senate. Another key priority for us is the Native American Voting Rights Act. This legislation is, maybe my second priority in my lobbying life. The Native American Voting Rights Act actually establishes a lot of protections for Native Americans when voting. For those of, I know that you all have some Native American communities in Washington that you work very closely with. And this would help ensure that Native Americans have better access to voting. We know that they have issues with addresses and with receiving ballots. We know that they have issues regarding long distances to travel with voting, and this would help put some federal oversight and some federal money into the voting process for Native American tribes all around the country, and it's desperately needed. In addition to those two pieces, we have also been working for funding for the 2020 elections because of COVID-19. As we've seen in states around the country, voters are being forced to stand in very, very long lines and choose their health over their right to vote. It started in Wisconsin. Last night in Washington, D.C., we had voters waiting in line until after midnight with a curfew that was in effect at 7 p.m. and polls closing at 8 p.m. And we know that states need funding so that we can have the best possible election in November as that we possibly can. And for some states, that means more money for no excuse absentee or vote by mail. For some states, that means we need to expand early voting. And still for others, it means that we just need to make polling locations safer so that people can come to the polls on election day and vote. We are asking for a total of $4 billion with a B as in boy, dollars. We've already received $400 million in the CARES Act. The House version of the next stimulus bill includes the additional funding, but we've also been told that that is dead on arrival in the Senate. But we're hopeful that there will be some election funding, and we're certainly pushing and having a lot of meetings with legislative staff to ensure that this happens. We got some insider information. We got some information, or a nod from Senator Blunt of Missouri, who is a part of the Republican leadership, and he indicated that there will be some level of funding for elections, just a matter of how much in the next bill. So we're very hopeful that states will continue to get money so that our election in November can be safe. Money in politics. This is one of my favorite issues as well. It's a good thing I work at the league. Through the For the People Act, and then through also some regulatory actions that we took with the Federal Election Commission, or the FEC, we have been supporting disclosure for a long time. Many of you know that the Disclose Act has come to the floor of the House and the Senate multiple times. It was one vote shy of passing in the Senate in 2014, I think. So the Disclose Act is a bill that would ensure that campaigns and candidates are required to disclose who their donors are above a certain amount of funding. The Federal Election Commission manages all of that, despite the fact that they do not have a quorum. And we continue to push for legislation in Congress because the Federal Election Commission is basically inactive. We're also working on small dollar public financing. I know that small dollar public financing is a success story in Seattle with some democracy dollars initiatives. But we continue to push for universal small dollar public financing in Senate and House races, as well as trying to save and ensure that the presidential public financing system stays intact. Immigration reform. We have been supporting several bills, as well as through litigation that support Dreamers and would ensure that the DACA system is codified into law. So we have been working with our allies around the country and our partners in coalition to push for immigration reform, not only ensure that Dreamers have a pathway to citizenship, but also ensure that we are not tearing families apart at our borders, that we're keeping our families together, and finding a way for them to legally come into the United States. Women's rights and league history. This has also been a lot of fun. Some of you may know that Virginia was the final state needed to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. We worked closely with the Virginia League to help them when they needed it. They didn't really need our help, but we tried when they needed it. And now that it's been ratified, there's an issue with a timeline. So when the Equal Rights Amendment was initially passed, it included a 10-year, well, a 7-year, and then later that was extended. So a total of 10 years to be ratified. It was not ratified by 38 states in that time. So it was technically considered expired. Since we now have all of the states we need for ratification, it's easy for Congress to act and just remove that timeline. And would ensure that the amendment can be ratified and put into the Constitution. The Department of Justice has said that the ERA has expired, and so the archivist who handles putting amendments into the Constitution has followed that guideline. There are several court cases that we have been watching, and I don't think Celina mentioned this, but it could potentially become a part of an amicus so it's a two-pronged approach with the ERA in as far as litigation, but also moving Congress to take action and to remove the timeline bill, or remove the timeline from the ERA. As with some of the other legislation, this has passed in the House, but it has yet to pass in the Senate. We've also been working on what I call the coin bill. It's HR 1923, and it would establish a centennial quarter act for women who were active in the women's suffrage movement, allow each state to pick a woman from their state to be honored as part of the centennial of women getting the right to vote. And climate change. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years, we've been playing a lot of defense. When I first came to the league, we did a lot of offense. Some of you will remember what feels like the hundreds of emails I sent and action alerts I sent out around the Clean Power Plan and getting rid of carbon emissions from power plants. The current administration has largely rolled back most of the regulations that the previous administration put into effect. That includes the Waters of the United States rule, the Clean Power Plan, the car rule. There's some mercury and air toxics regulations. So we've largely been on defense and working to stand up and say, no, that's wrong. People need these rules, and we need to stop climate change. We've also supported HR 9, which is the Climate Change Action Now Act in the House. Of course, that passed in the House. It has not yet passed in the Senate, but it supports a lot of the principles that were supported by the previous administration and would help the U.S. continue to move forward and fight climate change. Two more issues. We're very busy. Affordable health care, we are always working to defend the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. We know that there are a lot of leaguers out there who would like to see us take action on Medicaid for all. We would, of course, support that through our positions. We are currently in a position where we feel like we need to protect the legislation that we have in the Affordable Care Act so that folks have some type of protection for healthcare. So we continue to defend the Affordable Care Act and look for opportunities to expand our action on healthcare in the future. And then we've also supported Universal Background Check Bill, which is HR 8. which, surprise, surprise, passed in the House, but has not yet passed in the Senate. We work closely with the Brady campaign and their folks over there on background check issues and ensuring that, you know, people can't just walk in somewhere and take a gun home with them. They have to ensure that there's a proper background check and that they have the proper credentials to receive one. So we're very busy at the League with both our litigation and our legislation, and we're happy to take questions.
I saw a few questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Just scroll up.
Ah, there are a lot of great questions.
Hi, there are a lot of great questions here. We have quite a few, and I'm looking at some early on that came up, and I think that maybe we could start with where do things stand now with law enforcement issues? What's on the priority list?
That's a great question. And Celina, I don't know if you want to take this first, but I'll just quickly say we have been engaging with the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights around federal priorities on law enforcement, policing, and what we're calling justice reform. There is a resolution that was introduced in Congress by Representative Presley and Representative Omar last week. We haven't endorsed the resolution, but neither has the Leadership Conference. There are several pieces of legislation that have been drafted for a long time, and that others are working on. We continue to try to be good allies and good partners in this space and follow the lead of organizations like the Leadership Conference, but also try to stay true to our principles because we know that what is happening in our country right now is just wrong. The murder and killing of innocent Black women and men across the country is just not okay.
So you're essentially saying follow the lead of your allies and partners.
We are, and there's going to be some hearings coming up in the House and the Senate, and we anticipate actually a bill coming out of the House and going to the Senate later in June. And as we continue to see that move forward and as that language develops, we continue to look at it and we'll make decisions moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah, so there may be some action. There may be some action alerts related to that coming out, so you all should look out for that. But I really think it's important to stand in solidarity with organizations like the NAACP, AAAJ, because we know, understanding that during this pandemic, there's been a lot of Asian Americans who have been targeted and also have violence against them. So we just think that we should be working in partnership with the organizations that have members that are deeply impacted by this issue and follow their lead.
Good advice. We have another question, and Celina, this may go more to the case that you have on electronic signatures. We don't do that in Washington, and we're looking at a referendum right now that we just as soon not have on the ballot. and the deadline is coming. So share with us some thoughts about electronic signature gathering.
So yeah, so in the states where we've been able to convert the process to a digital signature or e-signature, have been places where there's already something in place for that does electronic signature. Like, for example, you can register to vote online and have signature, or when you request a voter your ID, your driver's license, et cetera, there's an electronic component there. So in states where there's already some type of electronic mechanism, then it's much easier for a state to convert a system because they already have something in place that can be used. If there is nothing in place, it's a little bit more difficult because that means the state has to establish something. And so I think that puts states and leagues in a tougher position because of time. We understand that with the short window of time especially between now and primaries, in states that have not already had them, but also through the election. That is a burden to create a new system, test it, and make sure that it's secure for voters in that time. So we have been focused on states that have some type of electric component in some other area, even if it's not in the voting space, to transition to e-signatures for the voting space.
Okay.
So that makes sense.
Thank you. And then we have a question about Tennessee. That's one of our participants has heard that in Tennessee you have to take a class before you can register to vote. And this may be confused. It says in Tennessee passed a law in which a person has to take a class before they are allowed to register people to vote. They can be arrested if they try to register people without taking the class. Is League of Women Voters looking into that?
Actually, Mr. Robert Creamer, we are.
You see him.
And we filed a lawsuit on in that. So there was a law that passed last year that really impacted third-party voter registration organizations negatively, like the League. In Tennessee, we're one of the largest organizations that do voter registration. I think there's only like 2 other organizations that exceed what we accomplish in the state, but they did this awful law that said that not only do you have to take a class, but if you register someone and there's even one error on it, that you could be charged, you could be either charged criminally, which I just think is ludicrous, or you could also be given like a $500 fine, which is steep for, you know, a league to pay or an individual to pay. So we went to court to push back on that, and we had a very favorable judge. He basically said, I'm going to give you X amount of time to figure this out. And then the legislature convened again and said, okay, we're going to knock that out. So they actually dismantled the law that they had previously put in place because the court decision was going to rule in our favor, which would have made it, you know, way more expensive and way more burdensome for them to have a loss on their plate like that. So yes, we did look into it. We actually filed a lawsuit and it was successful. So that is no longer in place in Tennessee.
And I'll also say that the work that we at the national office worked with the Tennessee League to get out action alerts to our national list as well of people who live in Tennessee. So that was this is really a great success story of advocacy and leagues working together at all levels. To work together, to speak with one voice, and to really make sure that the resources that we have at the national office can also be used by our state and local leagues.
And as long as we're on funny rules or not so funny rules, someone wants to know which states require notaries. And I guess that would be for an absentee ballot.
Yeah, so there's about 26 states that require it, some type of witness signature requirement. And so many of the states have on their own lifted or eliminated that requirement for the primary and hopefully also for the general. So I think and then the rest of them who haven't, we're in court suing them now. So
okay.
I think all of the rest of the states are where we're suing.
Okay. Somebody else wants to know, how's all this paid for?
Well, fortunately, I'm usually able to negotiate in-kind litigation support, which means that our national partners foot the bill on this. And so the leagues just have to do what they do well, which is talk about the amazing work that they do. But in my time here, I've only had one league have to pay for litigation, and that was in a Midwestern state once I got on. But within 2 weeks of joining, I had gotten them out of that situation. We weren't paying for that. So we do not pay for litigation at the federal or state level.
Okay, the crowd gasps.
Yeah.
You can't hear it, but I can.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll take that. Yeah.
And fundraising, that's on your job description, isn't it? Fundraising.
Oh yeah, we do a lot of, they call me to do a lot of fundraising, but the most important thing, what my job is at the league, or I envision, I feel like I work for you all. Like one of the things I noticed when I came here is I said, the national office often asks for a lot from the state and local leagues, but what do the state and local leagues need from us? And how can we make this more of a partnership situation? And so one of the things I'm trying to do is move the barriers that make it harder for you all to do your work. A lot of leagues didn't engage in litigation because they were approached by legal partners who wanted them to pay. We just can't do that. We're not an organization that's in a position to pay millions of dollars for litigation. So by removing that barrier, I think that's part of the reason why there's so many more states engaging in litigation, because we don't have to pay for it. And we're able to negotiate those contracts outside of that, so that the larger firms who do make a gazillion dollars a year can foot the bill on that. And, you know, on their end, it's viable for them because they take good cases that they can win, and in court, they can ask for those court costs from the bad actors. So it's a win-win situation for all. We just have to make sure we negotiate that well.
I suspect that we are also litigating more because there's more to litigate, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, the world is,
So,
yeah.
we have a question about, in our effort to incorporate the DEI lens in our advocacy work, we're finding a challenge with the fact that we do not have a lot of very specific positions regarding economic and racial justice. This has presented a problem in our allying ourselves with communities of color because it was felt that the only positions we could cite were broad. Is it appropriate to use a broad interpretation of positions we do have to work with these allies? An example would be, while we have many positions on healthcare, we do not have a specific position that says workers should have healthy environment. We have positions about discrimination and employment, but not about other forms of fair treatment of employees.
That's a very important question. So Jessica, I know you're going to be hot to enter this one, so I'm just going to say something really quick and I'm pass it to you. So we intentionally write national positions very broad. If we wrote them very narrowly, it would limit the amount of work that could be done within them. So we want to give as much opportunity, understanding that each state is different and the issues that you're contending with and using those positions is different, so that we're allowing as much liberty and innovation under each position. So it is intentionally written that way. But I do encourage folks to use that position because it does offer enough room for us to do quite a bit of work. I mean, I think you can see, as you know, with the breadth of litigation that we have, people are using these, same thing, we use the positions to file our litigation. We don't go outside of that. So with all of these cases going on, we have to find unique ways to use a broad position to tailor it to our very specific issue that we're having. So I think that that's intentional and a good thing for us. But then I'm also an attorney, so I like, you know, work in the gray area. So Jessica?
Yeah, I will add the equality of opportunity position is a really great broad position that can apply in a lot of these areas. And I will also say that if you are having problems thinking of what position goes for a specific area, you can always give me a call or shoot me an email. Tell me what you're trying to do, and I'll help you come up with a position that covers it. The other thing I would say is that, you know, just because it's not something specific written within the very broad positions that we do have, it could be in the history somewhere of a way that we have interpreted it in the past. So if you are using a national position, make sure to read the whole history. And if you still can't, you aren't quite sure, just feel free to give me a call. My office number works, you know, here at my house. I'm in my bedroom right now, and I'm happy to help.
Thank you. You all, both of you and all of your staff really do help a lot. Very responsive. We have a question about the Equal Rights Amendment. Are there any legal precedents for states rescinding their amendment votes?
You want to take that one, Jessica, or you want me to take it?
Go ahead. I mean,
so here's the interesting thing about that. So when a state ratifies the amendment, that gets a mark on the board, right? So if we need 39 states, that's a mark towards the 39. When states want to rescind it, that is a state action, that's not federal action. So it technically does not count at the federal level. So they can rescind it as a state, but it doesn't harm the federal mark in favor of the ratification. So that's the best way I can explain it. because people are concerned about that. They think that states can just ratify. They can, rescind. They can rescind it at the state level. But once they have ratified it, that is kind of in stone and doesn't impact the path to ratification at the federal level.
If we were in the office, you'd hear me screaming up and down the hallway, "You can't take it back!" Which
yes,
really kind of is concerning to my coworkers, I'm sure sometimes. You can't take it back. And there's actually precedents with the 14th Amendment where some states tried to rescind it and rescinding an amendment has never counted against an amendment when it has been finally ratified. So there's precedents for it. You can't take it back.
They also tried to do that with state sovereignty. When the country was trying to become one unified body, they were just like, we're in. And then they're just like, oh, we're not getting what we want. We were out. And the federal government was like, too late, you're in. So there is long-standing precedent around this that ratification is a federal action, rescinding is a state, so it doesn't count towards.
Lawyers, you all know everything. Workarounds, it's magic. Here's a question. How closely does the league work with the ACLU?
We work with the ACLU all around the country. That Tennessee case that Mr. Creamer mentioned, that was an ACLU Tennessee and national case. We also worked with ACLU in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Texas, Virginia, California, Rhode Island, South Carolina. It just goes on and on. I have a very good relationship with ACLU. They're one of our very trusted partners. I know that they're going to treat the leagues well. They're going to be good to our league presidents and leaders, but they also do have really fantastic attorneys. So I'm thrilled to have them as a legal partner across the country.
Popping back to the ERA, someone wants to know if the league should rethink the ERA. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said during an interview that she believes the 1982 deadline should be considered binding because too much time has passed. That's a little.
You guys just opened up a can of worms. Uh-oh. Jessica?
I respectfully disagree with the justice.
Yeah.
I respectfully disagree with her. She's amazing. I know we probably all love her. I don't think that kind of conversation when we are so close to ratification, when we have actually ratified it, when we are one one chamber of the government away from removing the timeline, is very helpful. And I wish she would have kept those comments to herself. And especially because I do think that, the litigation around this will probably eventually reach the Supreme Court. So I would just, again, reiterate that I respectfully disagree with her.
And, she's been an advocate, in the past for this. It's just, I'm not quite sure, just because there's been so much work, so many decades of work that has gone into it. So just to tell people to start over, it just feels bad. But I am going to see her in August. I'll be on a panel with her in August. So I'm definitely going to see if I can steal her away and say, what was that about? So I'll let you know if I get an answer.
Okay. Oh, we think you'll get an answer now that we know you. Here's a question back to the positions. There's a situation where somebody wants to know, are there positions that could easily be applied to support efforts to demilitarize the police and issues of what type of policing happens in differing situations? I.e. sort of the guardian or protector image versus the warrior image.
We are currently having a lot of conversation around this as we consider legislation moving forward federally. I know that there are some state and local leagues that have more specific positions than LWVUS does. And so if that's a position that you all need, I'd encourage you to take a look at maybe adopting something by concurrence. I don't believe that the league currently nationally has a position that would support the demilitarization of the police. But like I said, this is something where we are continuing to read impact on issues every single day, like more than I already do, and examine very closely how we can move forward.
I'll pop in here with, I feel like this is your semifinal exam, your midterms. Celina has been working on this. Jessica's been working on this. Here it is, the big exam. The spotlight is on you. Next pop question. What is no excuse absentee ballots? No excuse absentee.
Okay, so many states, when they implement an absentee voting rule, there are limitations or restrictions. So they may say, you can only request a ballot without an excuse when you're over 65, or if you have a disability, etc. So no excuse means that you don't have to prove that you're 65 or older. You don't have to prove that you're 18 years or older. You don't have to prove you have a disability, that you automatically get an absentee ballot and can cast that ballot validly within the state. So no excuse. We've been moving to have no excuse, or not universal absentee voting, but moving to no excuse absentee ballot, in addition to maintaining or preserving in-person polling locations on election day.
Okay. A while back, you talked about keeping in-person voting as well as vote by mail. And as you know, Washington is one of 4 states who love our vote by mail process. And so some of us were interested when you talked about having both and promoting both of those. Can you address that, please?
Yeah, so we've been talking really closely with the National Disability Rights Center, who does a lot of work in the disability community. So all of their members have some disability that they are affiliated with as a part of this organization. So one of the examples that she gave to us is, a visually impaired person can receive a ballot, but there's no way for them to mark it and verify it for themselves. They need some type of technology or to see a computer that is ADA compliant in order to cast their ballot. And so putting a person in a position where they have to have assistance when there are technology spaces for them to successfully cast a ballot and do that safely raises some civil rights concerns. The other thing is we try, I feel like at the league, it's our role to push for as many options as possible, and people have to make the decision for themselves, what is the safest and best appropriate way for them to exercise their right to vote. So our goal, or my goal at the national office, is litigation that provides as many opportunities as possible to be enfranchised. And then people choose it for themselves. But I do understand that there are states that have this in place and it's worked really well. But I think we also have to keep in mind that for many states that have this mechanism in place, it took years to get to a place where it worked well. It didn't automatically just become the magic potion for voter engagement and getting voters to turn out. So I think that because we're in a state of emergency and things are happening so quickly, we can't use it across the country as just a magic pill to get everyone involved. It's going to take a little work and a little practice and a little thoughtfulness about the different communities that are involved with this.
And I will just add that, a lot of people don't actually have addresses where they can receive mail. And that I talked a little bit about Native American access to the voting booths, and some of those folks don't have actual physical addresses. There are a lot of people in rural America who just don't have an address, and the post office, and the post office just can't mail them a ballot, and that's one of the things that we've seen with the census, right? Census goes door to door to update maps and to update addresses for people who can't receive mail. And so those people who have to have someone who goes to their door and gives them a census questionnaire also can't get a ballot. So it's really about expanding access, and like Celina said, making sure that people have the opportunity to vote in whatever possible way they need to be able to vote.
Okay. Someone asked a question about online misinformation. What are we doing at the national level? Besides saying liar, liar, pants on fire.
People in our office would love to do that. Right? We have to restrain ourselves from doing that.
Okay.
We do have to restrain ourselves to say that, although we do say it in confidence. But I think for us, there are so many individuals around the country who see the league as, you know, not just the League of Washington, the League of US, they see us as one brand. So they come to us for information. And I think the league is a trusted source of information. So for us, we think the best way to combat misinformation is just by putting out good information that's reliable and that can be verified, et cetera. And then doing education to encourage as many people to go to LWV.org or to lead them towards trusted sites. But I think it also is on us. Like, there's so much information that comes through to us over social media, over the TV and all of those things. And I think that we as people, individuals, whether it's in the voting context or not, also have to be vigilant about the information that we're taking in. Is it verified? Is this coming from a good source? Do we trust this source, et cetera? But there is, you know, there are people and individuals who are investing a lot of money in misinformation. So one of the things that, you know, besides just putting out good information, we've been having conversations with Facebook and Twitter to see how we can encourage them to vet information better. I think last week we were invited by Facebook to take part in some work group or task force to vet that information better. So that was huge for them to come to us and ask the league to be part of that. And it's because, you know, the public has seen the league as a trusted source of information.
And I'll say that we've also been, you know, with all of the ads, especially focused on social media and internet ads in the 2016 election, where we saw some foreign interference on behalf of a candidate. There's legislation in Congress called the Honest Ads Act, which would, you know, really update the rules around social media ads, put rules on social media ads, period, you know, and make sure that voters understand where those ads are coming from and what organization, what people are trying to influence their vote. And we've also tried to get the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, to institute rules and regulations regarding internet ads as well. We submitted testimony to them and were invited to testify a couple of, when this was up in front of them. They've tried to do it a couple of different times, and this time they got overwhelming support from the public to move it forward. They're just at a stalemate right now with the commissioners unable to move forward. But Congress also has that option to institute the Honest Ads Act as well. And that's another piece of legislation that's actually in HR 1. And someone had asked me what a good nickname for HR 1 is, and that's called the For the People Act.
We also have a question about OSHA on COVID-19. So that's initial speak for where is the Office of Safety and Health Administration? Is that what OSHA stands for? And how is OSHA related to what's happening with COVID-19, thinking about employees and their situation?
So OSHA usually deals with safety and hazards as it relates to food, usually. So like restaurants, making sure that there's a level of cleanliness and things like that. Although what I will say is that the CDC, when they were pulling together their guidelines, they actually called on several federal agencies to the table to develop those guidelines, and OSHA was one of those places, or one of those agencies that they called on, particularly because they want to make sure that the sanitation met standards. But CDC, using the medical piece of it, so how do we cleanse the machine so that the virus dies? And OSHA, and how frequently do we sanitize to make sure it's a safe environment for the people entering? So they work together to kind of come up with those guidelines, as well as Department of Agriculture, the FDA, and I don't know who else, but there was like 6 or 7 agencies that came together to help develop the CDC guidelines that are guiding the COVID response.
Jessica, do you want to add to that?
That's really more my husband's area. He works for an infectious disease association. So
Okay.
Ask your husband, and If we need to expand on that answer, we can send you an updated answer too.
Really, I thought it was pretty thorough, but you know, I'm an equal opportunity questioner here. Yeah. Someone says, I totally support bipartisan climate legislation. Is the league sure that our support of regulations is supported under a specific law?
Most of the regulations we support are under, I can't remember the section right now, but under the Clean Water and Clean Air Act. There's specific pieces of those, piece of historic legislation that allow the administration to make regulations regarding air or water. So that is, that, I can't, something B. I'm sorry, I don't know the specific, but I can get back to you. Yeah, so we're pretty sure that under the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, there are specific sections that cover the regulations.
Okay. One of our participants asks, when might a position not support something that we would like to do? That sort of makes you nervous. Can you give an example?
Well, we always try to find a way to say yes. That is really Celina and I's philosophy when a league comes to us. So we always try to find a way to say yes. I will say the one time I will usually straight off the bat say no is if a league is trying to contact a member of Congress that doesn't belong to them. So we do try and follow, we do institute a policy that has leagues only contacting the members of Congress or the congressional delegation that belong to them. If it's impossible to do that, then usually we can find a way for the national office to pair with the state or local league to get that action done. But we always trying to find a way to say yes.
Okay. I'm perusing through the questions. I want to make sure that I get all of them. Mood lighting. No, that's not good.
Sorry, it felt a little dark. I wanted to.
Really, it's twilight where you are.
Yeah,
this is regarding campaign spending. Do you do any lobbying coordination with political parties apart from legislative bodies?
No.
I want a little bit more specific on that question.
Political parties?
Just wondering if you engage with the political parties very much, or is it always legislative people?
There have been times when we have contacted the political parties and asked them to take a stand on a particular issue. There was a couple of years ago, or the last convention, we contacted the political parties and asked them to disclose their donors, because conventions tend to bring in very large sums of money from not only corporate donors, but also big money donors, and they seem to be less regulated. So there are times when we ask them to comply with our policies and with our principles and the things that we believe they should be doing. Doesn't always happen, but we do make an effort to ask them, just to step it up and tell us who's given them their money.
And then the only other time I can think of is like the recent endorsement that we gave of Vote Safe, which was this group that came together. It was bipartisan, so it had Republicans and Democrats coming together to have safe elections for November 2020. And so we try, if we are working with political parties, one of the things I think Jessica and I try to do is this bipartisan? Do we have representation on both sides of the aisle, so that it neutralizes that just political junk that we get with just dealing with one party. So, and putting ourselves in the best position to actually come together and for productive change, if that's what we're trying to do. In those instances, I can see us working with political parties, but in a way such that everybody's represented and it's a fair table that we're sitting at.
And since you brought up election 2020 in November, I have had several people ask me or speculate about what that's going to be like, even to the point of saying, will there be? What's the scuttlebutt around your neighborhood? related to the November 2020 election.
We were talking about this last night, right, Jessica? And I were texting at like midnight, like, what is going on? You know, I think if the primaries are any indication of what November could look like, it could be a hot mess, y'all. So we're trying to take the lessons that we're getting from the primaries, like the really long lines because there's not enough, you know, machines, poll workers, or, you know, this past Tuesday, we saw that states openly, they didn't have the proper cords for machines, or we had poll workers who didn't know how to operate the machines and get them up and running. So polls didn't open for like an hour or so. But that has an impact. When you show up at 7 a.m., you're trying to vote and go to work or whatever the case may be. So we're trying to take these as lessons, and not only as lessons that we just sit on and say, these are great to know, but also how do we turn the situations that we saw in the primaries and start reaching out to election officials and administrators now to get things in place to avoid the issues that we're seeing now during the primary season. So we're working very hard to provide guidance and work with election officials directly to see what is their capacity, what do they need, how can the league be helpful, and how do we make sure that this doesn't happen in November when voters come to vote on election day.
And I'll just say that the election in November is constitutionally mandated. And so it is written in the Constitution the day that it happens. So I'm a glass half full kind of girl, but I also strongly believe in the Constitution, and that it's a wonderful working document for us. So you know, as we continue to learn these lessons, it's really important as we move forward. And our colleague Jeanette this morning said, you know, every primary is a practice run for how we can continue to protect voters and expand access for the future. So we want to work with our state and local leagues to ensure that elections are successful all across the country in November.
Are you all concerned about the election being appended in November? Like, yeah, we've gotten that from a few states. So we actually are on a task force dealing with that and talking through, there's a legal component of it, so legal folks, and then there's also advocacy people, and then there's also grassroots organizations like the league. And so we're on that task force to talk about what could constitutionally happen, and if we even have a sniff that something like that could happen, what type of claims can we bring to the court immediately that would get relief as quickly as possible for everyone. But one thing I can say about the SCOTUS, even though, you know, they're kind of scary people to me right now, but one thing I can say about them is that we do have some very shrewd constitutionalists on the court who, you know, are interested in protecting their legacy. Now, they could just say legacy be damned, you know, at some point, but at this point, what we've seen is that they have stuck to being constitutionalists and protecting the Constitution, even if it conflicts with political party ideals. So we're hoping that that stays the course, but if not, we are prepared to sue. It's like 200 organizations that are prepared to sue immediately and get some relief.
It is hard to choose among all of these questions, so I'm trying to get everybody in, and I appreciate that we have a sort of an extra long time here. I'm doing a little bit of hopping around. I have one other question here. Somebody wants to know about how we can handle, it says, we are dealing with gun carrying white supremacist groups appearing in our town. What league positions would support a response? And I'm assuming that that's national and state. We do have some state positions on gun safety.
So yeah, that's a tough one, because, you know, if we're gonna say that this is democracy where everyone's rights are protected, you know, we have to say that even if we don't like how people are carrying out that, I think it comes down to when that crosses the line and becomes unconstitutional or illegal, like using a weapon to brandish or create threatening situations, etc. And now we do know that having a person come with a gun exposed, that's already threatening to many people, right? but I think that it's tough. I don't know, Jessica, maybe you know more of a better position. I know we have violence prevention, but that's more in domestic situations. We also have gun safety position and things like that. But am I missing something, Jessica? Have we
I was
used it this way?
looking at the book right now. I was actually looking to see if there was a principle that we could stand on here. I mean, our equality of opportunity position says that we should not, that everyone deserves, equal treatment, whether, no matter, what they look like, who they love, all of those wonderful things. And when people who, it seems to me that when people are showing up to protest those rights, that violates that position and that belief. So that is something that could be used. But it's probably something I'd have to dig into a little bit more, but I'm happy to do that. And you always feel free to email me or give me a call if you want to follow up.
But yeah, Heather Kelly. Oh, what a fun name, Heather Kelly. Yes, I think that we can use our positions to speak out against white supremacy. We released a statement last week from the league, and I don't know if you all saw that. We're happy to send that along to you in case you haven't seen it. But speaking out against white supremacy and just the racist infrastructure that we're in, like it's just a fabric of our country and something that we have to deal with as a country. But first we need to be comfortable having a conversation about race and privilege and all of those things. And I don't know that we're there yet. I think we're getting closer because we're just at a place where we're going to have to talk about it at some point. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of awful things happening. But yeah, I think there is plenty of room to stand on that position. I think we should be speaking out, not only at the national level, but at the state level against white supremacy and racist acts that threaten and harm the fabric of our democracy. This is all about maintaining a democracy that we all are contributing to and that we all see value in. So I think that you absolutely can do that. And I think you can take the lead of the national offices, statements and things like that to help craft that. We have Sarah Courtney and our comm staff, which is just amazing at messaging. So if you need help, because it's tricky, right? It's not easy to craft that message. So I think that if you do need support, please lean on us, and we're happy to help as we can in crafting that message. And then I think once you have a message template to work from, then all your other messages can kind of flow from that. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
And we also have past statements from Charlottesville, from I think a church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. We have other past statements that have addressed this. This is not something that the league is just doing because of what has been happening over the last couple of weeks. So you have other things you can lean on. And I also saw that someone, I think earlier, was talking about the history of women's suffrage, and that is something that we certainly have to acknowledge, that it is that the women's suffrage movement was not kind to African American women, and we have to acknowledge that, and part of that acknowledgement will help us move forward in our current times.
Maureen are having a very interesting conversation online right now.
The chat conversation is interesting. Watching people
going on in there.
Answer each other. Yes, well, that's Washington, or actually that's just the league. I wonder if you got to Heather's question about, do you have suggestions on how to stay nimble, and that's in responding, and that's always the tension that we have is, wait a minute, I need 24 hours to look at the action workbook. I would need a little time to research on that. So how do you stay nimble without appearing indifferent?
I think it's the same thing we balance that at the national office too, because things are happening. And I think when you have 12 leagues calling you saying, what are you guys going to do? It's just like, we have to figure this stuff out like today, y'all. So, it happens a little faster, but I think having messaging to work with is helpful. So once you get that first draft of messaging, I think that allows you to work faster and get things out quicker. But the other thing is we know league members, like we like to study, right? We like for things to be perfect, and we will study and research things until we know that it's as close to perfect as possible. But one of the things that we have said at the national office is that we want to get it right always, because that's just who we are. But we also don't want perfection to be the enemy of progress. So we want to make sure that, you know, the things that are really important that we need to be speaking out on, that we find a way to do that as quickly as possible and in alignment with our policies and principles. That answers your questions or offer any help in that space, but that is our process at the national office.
Thank you. There's a little bit of chat going on about the post office and how that's funded. And yes, is that a threat for us in our voting systems?
Jessica, you want to take?
Yeah. Get ready. No. Yeah. So, I mean, the post office is in danger. My father works for the post office, so I have some real concerns. He's about to retire, but I still have some real concerns. The post office is an essential service. And it's important to vote by mail, yes, but it's also important to everyone who gets their prescriptions in the mail. It's important to everyone who receives Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid checks or funding. There's a lot of different services that the Postal Service provides to us. Without the Postal Service, I doubt that I would have been able to get any of my online shopping orders or needed necessary items during COVID-19 with all of the stores closed and unable to, you know, feel safe going out. So it's not just about vote by mail. It's about a lot of different services. There is money for the Postal Service in the bill that the House just passed. It's called the HEROES Act, HEROES. Great. They're really great at coming up with acronyms. But so there is money for the Postal Service, and we support that funding. We're actually going to have a really great blog coming out from one of our colleagues, Priya, tomorrow, all about the essential services that the Postal Service provides and why we need to support it. So I would encourage you all to look out for that. And we've signed on to some coalition letters. Our primary focus right now is on the election funding, but we have been supporting, you know, some funding and some emergency assistance for the Postal Service to ensure that they can continue to stay open and we can continue to use their services.
Somebody wants to know, speaking of elections, can the president stop election with executive order due to pandemic? And can the president hijack the election with military interference? And what should the league do?
So the first one, no, you can't use an executive order to move a federal election that is a part of the U.S. Constitution. It does outline that piece. So no, even though I think people could try, right? I wouldn't be surprised if people try, but technically no. And then the second thing is, can you use militarization? And so that would invoke the First and 14th Amendment. So the threat or the deprivation or creating an obstacle in people exercising their constitutional right to vote. So the problem with that is that it could happen, and it would mean that we may have to go to court and have the court handle emergency litigation, so to speak. So handle it within a very short period of time and very quickly. But we are, like I said, with that task force that we're dealing with is actually dealing with that very issue and how we would, what is the workaround in a situation like that? How do we squash that as quickly as possible if that were to happen? But executive order, that's illegal. That's unconstitutional.
And back to guns, does the league have a position on making gun manufacturers liable for their products? They could build guns with safety features that would prevent a lot of misuse of weapons, including suicide and accidental death of children. And I thought that was litigated somewhere.
There's nothing in our position that covers that piece. I'm not sure if that's there. I'm sure there's probably been litigation, but I don't know that the league has been involved in that angle.
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm flicking through my questions, and it's sometimes I think it's a question, but it's really a comment, which is always good. How can we address poverty and inequality as dangers to our democracy?
I don't know that this is one of those questions I feel like no one's ever asked me before. Which I don't get all that often. So, I mean, the Declaration, is it Declaration of Independence? It says that everyone has the ability, I'm sorry, I can't quote it right now. My brain is.
Right to life, liberty, prosperity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right. So, I mean, I think that it's protected in one of the founding documents and is key to our democracy. One of the things we think about is that if we protect our democracy, we protect the institution, we ensure that everyone has not only the right to participate, but the right to know who else is participating around them, that we as a society can be much happier, and we'll know, no government will work for us. When we protect and fix our democracy, then government will start to work for us. And some people, I think, would argue that government is broken right now. But that's why we have legislation like the For the People Act and legislation like the Voting Rights Advancement Act, so that people can really, and voters and people in this country can have a voice and a say in their democracy and who represents them, so that we don't like them, that people can express their voices with their vote.
And I just think even just as human beings, right? We want to help and not harm. I mean, that's always my first thing. How can I help instead of bring harm? And, that's part of the reason why in the litigation that we're moving forward, we are focusing on the homeless population and the fact that, they don't have addresses. But does that mean that they don't have a right to participate and have a say in how the world works? And so including just simple things, or what could seem simple, but really important to us is, we're not coming in as saviors. That's not our role. That's inappropriate. But is there a way for us to use the privilege and the access that we have in order to help instead of harm? So I try to just approach the work in that way, because I think it's very, very important, because there are people who will never meet me and who I'm working on behalf of. There are people who I'm working on behalf of that I will never know who they are, but it doesn't matter. It's about what are the pieces that we need to put in place in order to make this a more holistic democracy. And I know that's very soapboxy. I'm not trying to make people think I don't realize that that's very soapboxy, but at the end of the day, I think that that's the reason why we are so meticulous in how we approach this work.
Moving on to almost another topic, the Posse Comitatus law prevented the federal government from deploying federal troops in the states. Was this law rescinded, and if so, when? And I'm not sure, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what Posse Comitatus is before you address the rest of it.
Circle back. It's been a long time since although I probably need to have a refresher's course now with everything going on. But I'm happy to circle back on that and give a more succinct answer. And
so you're gonna look something up and then we'll get it through our distribution system to our participants in this. I am so glad, because you had a straight A going here and I was getting really inadequate feeling that Washington can stump you, and so we're going to put that in our bios, like, wow. But that is what the military usually uses, in my experience, to say, no, we're not going to take over here, because that was I think that's why they don't use federal troops in some situations. So
yeah, why they can't use them in certain places, or how it can be rescinded. But that's you know, that's a law that's not used as often, although it's probably going to come up now. But yeah, there's been a number of statutes I know that have authorized the use of land and military forces to execute objectives like that. But I would want to look at that law not on its face, but also look at it in context with our positions and policies, because I think how do we reconcile that too is going to be what's most useful for leagues. So I just want to make sure we do that.
Okay, that would be good. And we have some communication going on in the chat about that, and so maybe we can circle back. And I think that we can save the chat. Save the chat.
Yeah, you can save the chat, and then any questions we didn't get to, you know, I'm happy to between Jessica and I, we can try to provide an answer and then shoot those back to you.
Okay, and I'm looking at Dolores and Amy, and they're either going to nod or shake their head on save the chat. I do a copy paste. Yes, we can. Amy can do anything, and if she can't, it's because you did it wrong. No, I'm just kidding. she can. One of the questions that we had is, what is heard in federal court and what is heard in state courts?
Oh, okay. Whew, thank goodness, the easier question.
I know. I'm helping you out here.
I gotta go back and see who did the Posse Comitatus Act. I'm just like, who's that? Let me see who that is. But anywho, so in federal court, what gets you into federal court is you have to raise a claim under the U.S. Constitution. So it has to be a First Amendment right, so your freedom to associate and speech and all of those things involved. The 14th Amendment, so due process, all of those things. You have to have something that's granted under the U.S. Constitution in order to be in a federal court. In a state court, you're using your state constitution, the election code, and things like that that are very specific to the state and only apply within a state in order to move that through state law. So in Pennsylvania, when we were challenging the redistricting map there, they actually used a portion of the free and fair clause in their state constitution to invalidate the map that had been drawn and create a new map that was more fair. And so when we had all of these cases that went before the Supreme Court, which were using the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court said, nope, we're not dealing with partisan gerrymandering anymore. So you guys have to go to the state. So all of the cases that we won in Ohio, Wisconsin, Texas, all of those cases were invalidated because the Supreme Court had ruled that all of those cases no longer are part of the federal purview. But in Pennsylvania, that was the only was the only case that stayed intact because they didn't use the federal constitution. They used the state constitution. So it was insulated against any invalidation. So hopefully that helps explain the difference. But state constitution or state election law versus a U.S. constitutional claim.
That goes back to they can't take it back, doesn't it?
Right.
Okay. See,
Exactly.
I'm following you. I'm following you.
Yeah.
One of our participants says, how can our local leagues be more connected with LWVUS and what you're doing? This session has been great. Would like to see more. And I think that you do some webinars and how do you get on the invitation list?
So we try to do monthly webinars on policy, advocacy, and litigation. We have a special page on the league management site, and I can go find the link and pop it into the chat box for you. But that's where we advertise all of our webinars. We don't currently have anything scheduled yet, although we'll do something similar to this webinar in July. And open it up to everyone across the country. We really do those monthly. And then I will also say, all of the league staff LWVUS staff is at home, but that doesn't mean we have stopped working for all of you. We've actually had a huge increase in our virtual webinars and communication. It had kind of already started before COVID, but so if you don't get the league update and you want to subscribe to that, that's also a great way to find out about upcoming webinars and all of the information that the national office is sharing. And if I have a second, I'll go and find where you can sign up for that as well.
And while you're doing that, oh, go ahead.
And just one more resource. Every week now since COVID has started, we send out weekly membership-wide emails. So that goes out to all 452,000 of you. So once a week, that email goes out just giving updates about what's going on around the national office, what litigation we're taking up, what advocacy things, how to get plugged in. So if you're not a part of that list, make sure that you're contacting your roster manager and that you're on the list, because we pull from that in order to send stuff out membership wide.
Okay, good enough. This session is supposed to go from 4 to 5:30, and we booked it until 6 because we knew people would have more questions and answers. And so I'm picking up the last few questions, and if there are more, you better jot them in now and get them on the chat so that even if we don't have time to pick it up, we'll be responding, and this will go out week after next, after Amy puts it together and Celina and Jessica have a chance to respond to it. I am looking at someone who's saying ending policies that remove voting rights due to incarceration or unpaid legal financial obligations seems like something that should be fought at the national level. Only Maine and Vermont have ensured continuous voting rights.
Yeah, so we just won a case in Florida.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Citizens case. So the Florida League, in coalition with a lot of different groups, was able to enfranchise 1.4 million returning citizens. And then the legislature tried, of course, to do what they do and undo all the good work that the league is doing. So we ended up having to go to court. And in our consent decree or settlement agreement, we were able to preserve the rights of 1 million. So there are about 400,000 people who still have some work to do. But of the 1.4 million were preserved. And it just means that if they have a petty fine, like they didn't pay a parking ticket, or they have a dry cleaner bill that was reported on their credit report, none of that stuff will stop them or be an impediment to them voting. So I think that that is important because that was a federal court case. And so it sets precedent around the country and certainly in that region of the area. But the thing is that we're not only raising constitutional issues there, but those are also very specific state election laws that we're fighting. So unfortunately, we do have to fight those state by state because the election codes are so different. But I think there has been criminal justice legislation to address that. It just hasn't moved and been passed yet. So there's still an opportunity at the federal level as well.
Somebody wants to know who all we can thank at LWVUS for all of this.
Staff. But especially our CEO, Virginia Case. Virginia Case joined, I was just here 3 little months before she joined, but she has been such a tremendous leader. She has been really the fire in the office that makes sure that we are doing, not only following our policies and position, but just doing what is right. And so she's just been so dynamic and such a great leader and so supportive. And so I think had it not been for her, we wouldn't have, it may be more difficult for us to have opportunities like this to share all the amazing work that we're doing.
Well, I think that this really brings home the point that we don't have to figure it out by ourselves. We just have to figure out how to find the information because, as I've said before, we've been doing something for 100 years, so we must have done a lot of this stuff, maybe with different technology, but a lot of this, we've been in these strange and unusual and brand new places. And if we can just get to people who can guide us as we proceed, it's really wonderful. We've had some excellent response from your volunteer lobbyists in Washington, D.C. They'll contact me and I'll say, Joanne Bengston down in Benton Franklin knows who that senator is or who that congressperson is.
Yeah.
And so the connections are really good because, as charming as y'all are back there, they don't care, but they care about us here. If we can influence
That's exactly right.
then we're pretty excited to do that. So we feel pretty proud that we can step up and do some things that help with that influence. So we're really thrilled to do that. I am seeing that it is nigh onto 9 o'clock. We don't want to watch anybody get into their jammies, and we know you still have work to do. But our hope was that we would have dinner together, as Joanna says. And I'm still looking for the cake. I want 100 years of cake. And I'm really disappointed that we're not doing that. So we want to invite you to come back when we can all hug and talk to each other closely, because everybody who is in the chat saying, I'm seeing all these accolades, and it really is true that you two are just dynamite. And we know that there are more of you. And we feel so confident that we can be useful and be well guided in our usefulness, rather than just sort of do what we think is the best thing, but actually have people who know join with us, and we can join with you and move forward. It's an exciting, terrifying time, and we feel like we got our legs under us. So I want to thank you both so much. And I'm going to—
And I just want to thank you all too. You all have been great partners for us. And the work that you all do in the state, like we could not do what we do without the amazing work of state leagues and local leagues. So I just want to say thank you. That's why we got on the call to talk with you, because I think that's one of the things that Jessica and I enjoy most, is seeing your faces and having a chance to talk with you and see just how ridiculously smart you all are. So we appreciate the opportunity to share some time and space with you, and thank you so much for the invitation to join you this evening.
Absolutely. Jessica,
Yes.
do you have a sign out statement?
I want to echo what Celina said. I really love my job at the league, not only because of the national staff and the national board, but because of all of these wonderful folks that we get to work with all around the country every day. League members are some of the smartest people I have ever had the pleasure to meet, and I love the work that we do together. And I put my phone number in the chat. So again, if anyone ever wants to give me a call and talk through positions, I know Ann Murphy and Kathy Sakahara from Washington call me all the time or email me all the time. And but I'm happy to do that for anyone else as well. And just thanks very much for the opportunity. And I do hope we all get to eat cake and hug each other very soon.